All right, what up, Brad fans? Thank you for tuning into this episode. I have a great conversation for you with the one, the only Simon Landry, founder of featherposter.com, the place where you can get 36-inch by 48-inch conference posters, or any poster really, printed on canvas so that it's easily fold-upable, if that's a word. And you could put it in your bag. Makes travel super easy. They don't crease. They look great. High quality fabric will display your graphics and figures in high resolution. And if you use the promo code TWOBRAD, TWOBRAD, all one word, at checkout, you will get $10 off. And Simon founded this great company. Check it out, featherposter.com. And he joined me to talk a whole bunch of different topics. We talked about his graduate work into perception, so some psychology, some brain biology. Really fun conversation about perception, how we learn, how the brain learns, perception, and that how you learn that your hand is actually your hand when you're a child. Really, really just fun, kind of wacky conversation about science. And then from there we turn to issues with how we currently do science in society, so really academia. We talked about science, the sciences, and the job of science and academia of alienating people. We talked a lot about science communication, how that is failing. How do we incentivize communicating science for researchers in academia and stuff like that? It was just, like, to be honest, one of the funnest conversations I've had in a long time. Simon's a really great guy, super fun to talk to, super passionate, super thoughtful, and you can check out more of the stuff that he's doing. He's doing a lot of cool things, and he'll talk about it in the episode, but you can go to Dr. Simon Landry to check out more of what he's doing. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. I'm going to cut this off right now because I had such a blast talking to him, and I hope that you all enjoy it too. So, bring us in, Freak Motif. From there, it's on to my conversation with Simon Landry. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Simon, for joining us, and thanks for, I guess, originally reaching out to promote Feather Poster on the show. You were the very first person to sort of reach out to the podcast and get in touch. Well, so thanks for that.
Likewise, you were the first to reply to my emails, so I appreciate that.
Right on. Well, let's start from the beginning, a logical starting point. We're both a couple of guys that did graduate
couple
school.
Of guys just chatting on a Saturday.
Couple of guys who did graduate school and then left academia to pursue other things. You're now into podcasting. I'm into podcasting. We're podcasting together. What a lovely story. But why don't you maybe fill us in on sort of what was your journey through graduate school? What did you Where are you from? Where did you start? I know you're Acadian, correct?
Yeah, exactly. I'm Acadian.
So we could touch on that too. Some of the listeners outside of Canada, some of the listeners inside of Canada might not be familiar with that either.
I would love to turn this into just an Acadian podcast for just a Too Bad for You Acadian special. We'll see if we have time. So I'm from Moncton, New Brunswick. And I did my undergrad in psychology at Bishop's University. I don't know. Do you know Bishop's?
Yeah, in Quebec,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yep.
So it's a small liberal arts school. And so I never knew how to study. Did you ever learn how to study?
Not really. Yeah. And truth be told, I was the kind of guy that in my younger days didn't really have to study. So when it came actually to undergrad and then going on further, I got a real shock.
Yeah, yeah.
Like my first semester of like real university school, grades plummeted, and I had to be like, I need to figure something out.
Exactly. So I'm the same, only I never kind of really figured it out. And so like at the end of my undergrad, I didn't do as well as probably I should have. But because it was a small school, I had a really good relationship with one of my profs. And so I studied psychology, which is like the program that people who don't know what they're doing go into.
Yeah, classic.
Just classic move. And so I had this one class, a sensation and perception class, with this guy, Benoit Bacon. Shout out. I always shout out to Benoit Bacon because he really, like, I am where I am in life because of him. Nice. And so he taught perception and sensation and perception. And I was like, what? This is a thing that you can study this? Like, this is, it's a thing. And so I sort of studied, I did a neuroscience minor, which at Bishop's is just like intro to sciences. So I did chemistry and biology and all those other classes. And then when I graduated, I had like a B minus. So really not, I mean, it's not great. It's not bad, but it's also not great. And I was sending emails back and forth to this guy, Benoit Bacon, and at some point he was like, my old, supervisor is looking for a student, and you're the kind of student that he takes, like kind of the kind of student that has like, that's clever but just doesn't have the structure to like do something with.
You're a unshapen ball of clay that can be molded.
Like a super lumpy ball of clay. And this guy Jean-Paul Guimau, his thing was he would take students who kind of like wayward students or just a bunch of balls of clay and just kind of shape them into researchers. And so I did my master's with him, and I did like a pre-summer or a pre-master's like summer thing with him, just so we could try each other out. And it was with rats. So I was studying single cell activation with sound. Was it sound and vision, or just like auditory stimulus? Yeah, stimulus.
Some kind of stimulus. Yeah.
And turns out studying animals is like really hard. It's just like not a fun time. And so I just didn't like it. It's just like, it's tough. But one of this guy, Jean-Paul's previous students just started teaching, was a prof, and he was looking for a student. And so Jean-Paul was like, why don't you do your master's with this guy, Francois, and we'll co-supervise you. Yeah. And then you can do it with humans. And so for Francois, it was an opportunity to sort of learn how to be a supervisor. And for me, it was an opportunity to be a student. And so during my master's, I had studied how sound and touch mix in the brain of people with cochlear implants.
Okay, so these are the usually in children, they have, I don't know why they have the implant, but they lose their hearing, basically.
So they'd lose their hearing, and then you could kind of, I'm not going to get too, I can like, you know how it is with science, you can just be like, okay, let me get into the details. So basically, like, the idea is, and I love asking this because everybody's got like a different take on it, but so if you were to go deaf right now, like your brain would adapt to that, right?
Right.
And so you've got regions of your brain that would no longer receive input. So your brain would do something, stuff would change, like brain plasticity. But if you regain the ability to hear, what happens to your brain? Like, does your brain go, oh, here's sound, like, I remember what to do with this, I'll just reactivate my pathways? Or does it go like, I forgot, like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah, I think the intuitive thing would be that those regions that were like, say, dormant, would just come back online. But knowing what I know, which is very little about the brain from my wife, Teresa, also neuroscientist, I'm guessing that it does something crazy, like it develops totally new pathways.
Yeah, so it depends. Like inside, inside
it's even more vague.
You're right in both ways. So yeah, it turns out, like, so more specifically, what I studied was, so if you think of our sensory experience as like our brain mixing all of our senses. So right now we're talking and we're Skyping at the same time. I see your face and I also hear your voice. My brain mixes visual and auditory inputs to like form this concept of Brad speaking.
Right.
That integration is automatic. It's not like I'm not saying like, oh, okay, that when his mouth goes this way, it means like, oh, and so on. So when you lose sound, there's a decoupling, right?
Ah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and then when you regain sound through this like electrode that's in your ear, then the question is like, does it recouple or does it kind of stay parallel? And the thing that's interesting with that is that means somebody who has a cochlear implant that would go see a dubbed movie.
Right.
So when there's a dubbed movie, sound and vision are just totally off, right?
Right. Yeah,
so you need to be able to decouple sound and vision. But if your brain, with these cochlear implants or whatever, like when you get sound back, it really just tightly connects them again, then you're unable to decouple it the way that like people who are kind of skilled with sound and vision are able to. So it just becomes a super overwhelming experience where nothing makes sense.
So the folks then that have lost their hearing and then regained it through the use of an implant have trouble with, say, like a dubbed movie.
Yeah, some of them do.
Yeah. Crazy.
So yeah, it's just like that's what I studied for my master's a little bit during the PhD. Because after my master's, I was like, okay, cool, 2 years of doing this, had a lot of fun. What now? And then my supervisor was like, well, I can take you on for a PhD. Like I published a whole bunch during my master's. You have a pretty good shot at getting like a CIHR or whatever. So if you want, we can do that and just keep on doing research together and it should go well. And at the time, I was starting this app called GraphMap. To find and share and discover street art around the world. It's like this is cool. 2012. So it was like Instagram and Google Maps for street art.
Neat.
And I was like, do I stay in grad school or do I just like go off and try to do this thing? But I ended up staying in grad school. Yeah.
So the app is no more.
No, the app is no more. I did a successful Kickstarter though, so like it existed for a while. And then during the PhD, I just did a bunch of research. I studied how sound and touch integrate in the brains of musicians.
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
And I was really big into perception, so just like I had the opportunity to just test these weird sort of notions of perception, like what happens. So like, okay, here's another question for you.
All right, let it rip.
If you were to go blind right now, okay. Oh, before that, let's work with the assumption that blind people like hear better, right? Like
right. That's like kind of like I don't know if it's a myth or not, but that's what people say. You lose your sight, your other ones are going to become more enhanced or something.
Exactly, right? And like we've seen Daredevil, like there's kind of this pop
Yeah.
culture notion around it, and there's a little bit of research that says like that suggests that that's the case for certain things. But if you were to go blind right now, at which point would you be a blind person? You know, like
how long does it take for like your other senses to do all the things that we associate with blind people?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Oh, I mean, I feel like it's got to be like at least like a month or a couple months or something.
Yeah.
But
I see. I don't know, and we don't know that. So it's like it's a thing that we don't know. But what we did, so one of my like fun studies is we blindfolded people for 90 minutes, and after 90 minutes, they had increased auditory abilities in this one specific thing.
Ah.
Yeah. So like.
So you give them a baseline test
Yeah.
and then blindfold them and then repeat the test, and
Yeah.
and generally they're better.
Yeah. Exactly.
Huh.
Yeah.
Which also doesn't surprise me, because like you hear like the brain plasticity is just something that is so, you know, I've seen work with putting, you know, implants and stuff, and you know, when they have to, you know, monkeys or rats or whatever, you can give them like a robotic arm or a like a mouse pointer on a screen to control, and they learn to like use it and integrate it into their brain, you know, as like an extra sense really quickly.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, so
It's fascinating.
So like that study in particular, the thing that we found that I thought was really neat, and it's like that's what I love about research, man, is when you like you're just so deep in a topic and you're thinking about it all the time, and you're like, wait, maybe we're just thinking about it wrong, and then you like change your perspective on it, and you're like, what, that, like, if that's true, then that's true, and it just like all these other things line. So like the idea with this visual deprivation study is that when we're born, like the brain, so our brains are good, and they're like wired the same when we're born. Everybody's wired the same, sort of, more or less.
Yeah, generally, yeah.
But the brain doesn't know that the occipital cortex, let's say, is good at processing visual information. It doesn't know that that part of the brain, in terms of like hardware, is well suited to process information that comes from the eyes versus information that comes from the ears.
Okay.
And so it's just when you're born, your visual cortex receives everything. So and so everybody's synesthetic. What's the word for like seeing sounds?
Oh, synesthesia? Yeah.
So everybody's synesthetic when we're born, because our brain is just like, I don't know what to do with this.
Just like overload of stimuli, and it's got to sort it into the right pathways or whatever.
Yeah, so it sorts it, but what it does is that it'll take sound and vision, let's say, that goes to the visual or the occipital cortex. And it's just like, I'm really good at processing this. I'm not so good at processing that. So I'm going to start taking more of the vision, and like, because that pipeline's getting bigger, the other pipeline's getting smaller.
Right.
So that pathway still exists, and like, it's still there, but it's just used a lot less.
Right.
And so that means that when you cut out vision, the auditory input is still kind of trickling in. It has more like space.
More bandwidth or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of goes there, and like our visual cortex is not good at processing things with like temporal cues like sound, but it still does cool stuff with it, and it can still process it in a cool way. So that's why you have like your better processing of sound in certain ways.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's just that you sort of shut off a certain tube, and then you've got information coming in from the other tube.
Yeah.
But the thing with that, it's we'll move on from this, because this could turn into just a perception podcast. The thing with that I find is really interesting is like, in terms of perception of the brain and all that, if you have that flexibility of like what the accepting that the brain can be flexible, it means that you shouldn't be surprised when you find auditory or tactile activation in the visual cortex.
Right.
Because like, it's only surprising because it's like we conceived the brain the same way that we conceive a thing that a human would make. Like, the bathroom is for where you shower and go to the bathroom, the same way the auditory cortex is where addition is processed. But nature's not like that.
Yeah.
And so like, sorry.
No. It's all good. I'm just saying, I didn't know that. kind of makes you realize, like, when you're like watching a young kid, see the world and stuff, for the like they just like they look so overwhelmed a lot of times. Okay, so that makes sense now. But it's also like, so the this like baseline state of the brain, the child's brain, when it comes out, it needs to, it's like you got to train the algorithm to know, like, okay, this information is best suited for this region, and then it sorts it all out. So you have these different compartments that are sort of built to be better at one thing than the other. But you as the user have to give it the information to sort of, so that it realizes that.
Exactly.
But there is like a blueprint that's kind of there in all of us.
Yeah. And like the thing kind of moving related to what you're saying about babies, like I think fundamentally we take a lot of what we experience for granted. So like the fact that you see a hand and you know it's yours and you feel stuff from that hand is so basic, right? It's like, obviously this is my hand that I'm looking at in front of me, but you had to learn that when you move a thing, you see a thing moving and you feel something. Those are associations that you learned. Like a baby sees a hand, it doesn't know that the thing that it's moving is also the thing it's seeing, is also the thing it's feeling.
That is wild to think about. Like if you were able to remember that, right? Because you don't remember what it's like to be a baby, but if you were able to remember that, there would be a period of your life where you'd look back and be like, yeah, I remember seeing my hand and being like, what the hell is that?
Like
and then touching something and being like, what is this?
And so the cool thing about like breaking down perception is that way, that it allows you to dream about the future of VR in a really cool way. So like, if you're in VR and you see a hand, it's no different than when I see my hand in real life. Like there's actually no difference.
Right.
It's just
like, cause you're able to make that association, cause you've learned that, like, and your brain's better able to like not get confused by the difference in the.
Well, it's like if
scenario, I guess, I don't know.
It's like if you're in VR and you see a hand, and when you make a movement, you see a hand moving, whether it's your real hand in real life or it's a virtual hand, your brain is like, it's a hand that's moving, it's mine.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And this kind of goes to like, I'm sure I've talked about it on this podcast before ages ago, but I kind of just alluded to, there was this research. I watched this guy give a talk once. He's Brazilian. I can't remember his name now, but he was doing these kind of things with, monkeys, animals. That's how you start. But like, giving them basically a robotic hand or something to control. And the brain is so quickly able to be like, oh, well, this is just my sixth limb now, or whatever it is, like I got four limbs and a tail, so give me something else, and I'll just incorporates it into your. That's really cool. But it's like you had to figure that out as a child. Which is wild.
Yeah, exactly. And so like something that if I had a research lab, I would, and we'll get to why neither one of us has a research lab a bit later. But something that I think would be super cool and just actually completely new is I would love to make a VR setup where you would have like a little EEG cap or something, like a Muse or whatever, and it would pick up. There's a thing like called time travel where you think about something in the past or something in the future, and there are some EEG markers for thinking about the past or thinking about the future. And so you can like
so you can pinpoint when the person's thinking about past or future events based on the cap readings.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So I would love to have a VR program where it would let somebody move through space but also through time. And that would mean that the same way that like the monkey learns how to use a fifth arm, we would use our brains to move through the fourth dimension in a way, but in a way that evolutionarily, like, it makes no sense. Like, we're just not built to do that.
Yeah.
And I wonder what part of the brain would be like, oh, I got this. Like, I'm here for like the ability to move through time.
Yeah. What region would like come online
Yeah.
or be, what regions would start working together or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, the logistics of that sound doable.
Yeah, it's super,
right?
like, it's super simple. That's the thing.
But wouldn't you have to, like, the VR program would then
Yeah.
have to be set up to know, like, you would have to be able to recognize, okay, I'm in the past now, I'm in the future.
Yeah.
So you'd kind of have like the person's memories for them to go back to or
I'm
something?
thinking
Like,
more-
how would you set up that past future scenario? We're getting into the weeds here, but it's cool.
So it would be like there are games that exist that do that already, but it would be like, I don't know, super basic. You'd have like a kitchen, a virtual kitchen, and a person that's also there. And then like you could throw a cup on the ground. And then the person would react to the cup being thrown on the ground. But then you could move back in time, not throw the cup on the ground, or like, and then the person would react differently. Like, it's just basically an AI, like a character that reacts to stuff that you're doing.
Right. And you could almost like those old, this might be really dating myself, but you know those old choose your own adventure books? Did you ever read those? Yeah. And so there's like certain points where it's like you can choose A or B. And then if you didn't like the outcome, you just flip back to the page and be like, well, I'm gonna do the other route. So you do that in kind of a virtual reality space.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Dude, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, so it's like, it's stuff like that I think is, like, scientists need to, once you start thinking about these fundamental concepts of the brain and like just how just break things apart and then try to rebuild it together and be like, what can we make with this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in like the vast potential of the brain, like everyone's, and like you said, how it's like we think about it as it's built as if it were built by a human, and that's a limiting way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's not built by a human. So.
Yeah, and that ties into last week's podcast. Let me just pull up my notes here.
The one you're talking about, the one that Teresa and I did.
Yeah.
The last one we released on Too Bad for You here. So we were talking about some of these things, how the brain synchronizes in bats, I believe, with, when they're socializing. But
yeah. So the thing that I thought really interesting about that is that, like, to find it surprising and to discuss about human brains synchronizing makes this basic assumption that we're individuals.
Right.
And that we're not connected.
Right.
Like, I don't know if kind of the fundamental assumption, if I'm making that clear, like, that I don't know how to describe this. Like, so I used to listen to a lot of Alan Watts.
Okay.
And he's this philosopher guy from the 70s that was like he brought Buddhism and all that to the States. And his thing is that everything's connected and all that. And it's like, if you take if you take your finger on a surface and you look at it, then it's like clearly finger and surface. But the more you zoom in, the more you're unable to tell the difference, right?
Right. When you get to the molecular level, the atom level, it's just atoms. Yeah.
Yeah. So like things just our perception, like things are only defined because of our perception.
Right.
And so humans the same way, like, are only individual because that's like the way we experience it. And it's like weird for me to think that you and I are connected the way that a colony of ants are connected. Because like, I have thoughts. Those ants don't have thoughts.
Yeah.
And so
I can tell I have a boundary of like myself and others. And, But so you're thinking like this whole idea of how what they found with the bats, that when two are engaged in, social behavior or whatever, so they're like interacting with each other, their brains are basically clicking at the exact same frequency.
Yeah.
kind of shows that the boundary between two individuals is not as great as we perceive it to be.
Yes, the same way. Yeah, now I remember what my little notes didn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Convey.
But because you were talking about mirror neurons also.
Right, yeah.
And how
we touched on that, yeah.
Kind of like sort of a social contagion of I feel something, you feel something. But if we go back to what we were talking about, like I learned that my hand is my hand, then it makes sense that if I see another hand, that would also activate some part of my brain because like, why not? Like
right.
My hand is only my hand because it's integrated with with like touch and motor. But I see another hand. Part of me back in the day when I was born, I probably thought that other hands were mine too, because why not? You know?
Right. Yeah. Wow. So do you think then it's like this idea, well, I mean, the synchronization thing, like, and this is what Teresa and I were kind of talking about, is it's sort of, and, maybe I didn't grasp this enough, but I was trying to be like, what's the significance of it, or why does that evolve? Does it evolve to allow social creatures to interact? But then you think about it in this way, maybe it's kind of just a byproduct also of like, I had to learn that my hand was my hand, and that these are my things. So you then logically probably are like, well, other people had to learn that their hands were their hands, and so they've gone through the same process.
Yeah.
So you kind of have this remnant of like, when I see them doing something, it's like, yeah, I've done that before too.
Yeah.
So I know what it's like.
Yeah.
I know what you're going through, man.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out whose hand is whose.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's like a built-in way for it. But then, evolution acts on different things, and maybe there's a lot going on there, dude.
There's
a lot going on.
There's a lot. Yeah. It's the sort of thing where like every layer that you think about, there are just so many things to unpack.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I think that's, to bring it to science, like that's a huge problem with the way that we do science, is that every level to like get to that point where just in that conversation, I feel like we were really close to getting to a point where it was like, whoa,
Yeah.
but like in order to get to that point, you need to keep all these things in your head that like lead you to that like insight. Right. And that's just so hard because there are all these things that like you need to test and all these things that you need to like know for sure almost in order to be able to say, oh, we aren't so different.
Yeah, exactly. It's super specific. You have to, you can have this conversation and we can, hypothetically get to somewhere, but then to go back and like verify each step and test each step, to tie all the strands together, you start to lose this bigger picture that you're looking at. Yeah.
And every step is like somebody's career. Somebody could spend, and that's why I think it's one of the weaknesses of science and one of the strengths of like philosophy and all that, where a lot of the stuff. So this guy, Alan Watts, shout out to my man, Alan Watts.
I'm sure he's listening.
Yeah, from beyond.
Yeah. We broadcast there. No worries.
So a lot of stuff that he says, and nothing really comes to mind, but like he says things that they're very vague, obviously, because he's not a scientist, but like they're very vague, but they line up perfectly with like the latest Nature article. The stuff that we find is like, it works with these like old Buddhist frameworks of like understanding the self and sort of relationships and all that. And I find that super interesting, that like science finds truths and all that, but at the end of the day, like it's all these details that lose the bigger picture.
Right. It's almost like science is really good at lighting the pathway that you're walking on, but it's not good at telling you which pathway you should walk down.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas something like philosophy, and I think that's always like, that was always the really interesting parts, again, for me too, like with science, was these, this idea that you're at the tip of the spear, that there is some unknown, and you're forging into it and generating knowledge. But then there's like these larger, like you say, larger discussions where it's like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Where should we look next?
Yeah.
And the direction of that, a lot of times, especially when you're talking about things like psychology and human psychology, it would be directed by philosophy, or even like really ancient, probably, I guess you could consider these some sort of philosophy, but in some cases, ancient religious texts like Buddhism or something like this, where it's like people were thinking about these ideas, they're age-old ideas, they're age-old questions, but you now have the methods to actually verify some of that. So with the question that I'm thinking of, though, is like, how do we recognize the problem that in science you get too nuanced, and you spend a whole career looking at one region of the brain or one cell or whatever it is, right? That you lose that bigger picture. But we have to have the verification process. We don't want to just go on false assumptions. So you need that verification process. And so how do you blend those two? How do you not lose sight of the big while still not missing the little steps along the way, right?
I think that the easiest way to do that is to realize that science is not something done exclusively by scientists.
Makes sense.
When you realize that like science is a process, and it's not like because you're a scientist that science, like it's not linear that way, and you realize that I'm gonna test something, and then part of the scientific process is to have to communicate that and to distribute that knowledge, and then like that knowledge needs to have an impact on society, and then society then returns to me with sort of feedback on that knowledge, and I will react to like sort of another question that comes from that loop. And then it forces you to understand the bigger picture.
Right. Yeah, no, it makes sense. That makes sense to me.
It's a tough one. It's cool that it makes sense to you, because it's a really tough one. I think the majority of like hardcore scientists would disagree with that.
Yeah, could be. But I mean, I look at it like, let's go back to the example of the kid figuring out that his hand is his hand. To me, that's science, right? Like, you're doing that every day because you're like, he or she is probably going through the process of, I've observed something, this hand. Yeah. I have an idea that maybe I'm in control of that. Let me see if I move it, it does this. And then you're testing that hypothesis and then moving on and integrating it. So it's all these things, and I've often tried to explain this to people as well, just that how much you do science in everyday life, how much, like everything, and especially my examples usually come back to kids, right? You learn that the stove is hot. How did you learn that? You touched it. You experienced that, and then it's like, well, I touched it again and it's hot again. So now you've confirmed the hypothesis, and you're just going through the method. So it's almost like this, like science, the scientific method is just innately human, or innately like something that we do. But then, so then where do we direct that power or that thing? And it's in your whole life, so you can't separate it from life. You can't separate it from society. You can't separate it from because it's just the way things are. It's how we figure things out.
For sure. And it's really unfortunate, I think, that it's really unfortunate that scientists are can I say sort of bad words on this podcast? I think
you say whatever you want. Don't worry about it. We have no filter here.
Cool. I think it's really unfortunate that scientists were really shitty people and are generally really terrible at being inclusive and are perceived, probably rightly so in a lot of ways, as being in their ivory tower, and like science is not what you described. Like, you could ask people on the street, like, who does science? And then you could show this like crusty old man, this
Mm-hmm.
old white guy, or a baby, and they'd all say like, well, it's the Einstein looking guy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But like, no. And it's like, it's really too bad that scientists are just so fucking into themselves and like gatekeeping this method of understanding the world in a way that it's alienated everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
I wonder how much of this comes though too, because in order to, and maybe this brings on a discussion of like how we do science and how it's like organized, but in the way that it's organized now, I'm getting lost in my own thought here, but
yeah.
in order to be really good at cataloging all of the minutia and the details that you need in order to gain this knowledge, to do the knowledge, right? Like to do the lab work,
Yeah.
to keep it all organized, to make sure that you've, checked everything and that yet your hypothesis holds true, that data collection, that whole process, that whole skill of doing that, which you need in order to make sure that the knowledge you're generating is true,
Right.
attracts a certain kind of person,
Yes.
right? And those people generally aren't skilled at the other side of it, which is kind of what we're talking about,
Yeah.
right? And see, this in my personal experience in my life, I always enjoyed science, and I've always held these ideas that, we're all doing science all the time and it's really great. But when I got to grad school, that's when I realized I'm not good at keeping all the data straight. And I don't want to be that guy that's like meticulously keeping a lab book and the notes and everything that's needed in order to do sort of good research. We won't call it science. Let's just say good research.
Good. I like
right. And so I was like, well, this isn't my skill set. I love the other stuff. I love what we're doing now. I love talking about it. I love reading about it and stuff. But then, so how do you, should it be part of the training of scientists to like maybe do philosophy courses or, do more, but then it comes to the incentives that you've built into doing science.
Yeah.
In order to get the grants, in order for the university to get the money, blah, 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 all this, we want data, we want results, we want boom, boom, boom. I don't know.
I think it's like, it's a really weak excuse to, I think that we excuse scientists for their like social, like what's the word I'm looking for? Weirdness? Deficits. But the reality is like, man, it's not that fucking hard to be a normal person.
You say that, but I don't know.
No, but-
Some people
no, but-
struggle.
But like some people struggle, but it's only like you can learn to be a rigorous scientist. It's a thing that you can learn, and it's a skill, and like you might not like it, but
Right.
if I told you, hey man, this is like you have a job, and that job is to be a rigorous scientist. I am a rigorous scientist. I will train you how to be a rigorous scientist.
Right. It's a
might not-
learnable skill.
Yeah, it's a learnable skill. Social interaction is really simple, and it's like it's not easy, but it's simple.
Right.
And I think it's
Yeah.
completely unacceptable that we have these scientists that are like that literally sexually assault people because they don't understand social cues. Like, man, fuck that. Like, that's so unacceptable. And they're like, no, but this guy's like he's really good at science. Fucking who cares, man?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
if he can learn how to spend, and I am using the he like nonstop consciously here.
Well, let's be honest. It's usually a he.
Yeah, it's like it's very much usually he. If this guy can spend a lifetime studying something, he can spend time studying how to be a fucking decent human being.
Right.
And like, and then it just perpetuates. Like, shitty people go with shitty people, and this guy won't be a good mentor, and it just like perpetuates this shittiness in science. And we're okay with that because they're like, no, they're in their lab, like they're doing their own thing. Scientists are always portrayed in media in like this way, and it's like it sucks because it just perpetuates, it messes it up honestly for the both of us.
Yeah,
Where like
totally.
we're the outsiders being like, yeah, we can do rigorous science and we like chatting and we like meeting people and all that. And
Hmm.
it's like, whoa, those guys aren't real scientists. Like they're not.
Yeah. Wasting their time trying to explain
Yeah.
this stuff to the public, or wasting their
Yeah.
time on YouTube or whatever it is. Yeah.
And I
But
think,
then,
yeah, it's anyway.
no, okay, if you want to continue.
It's just
but
it's. I was just gonna say it's completely unacceptable.
yeah, no, and I see what you're saying, but
Yeah.
and it makes sense. You're right. It's not acceptable, and it is an excuse that gets thrown out there as like, oh well, these guys are these eccentric geniuses or whatever, so we kind of have to just cut them some slack. But I wonder how much too it is like. I mean, you hear about the bad, you don't hear so much about the
Yeah.
good, right?
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, not just science, this unfortunately, the systems that we have, ruthless people get ahead, So there's that, like it's not just a problem in science. And how much of it is that it's like we've rewarded one thing,
Yeah.
productivity or whatever it is too much, that we've created, now this situation where we've got all these people who were able to play that game, and it's a shitty game, and they're shitty people.
Yeah.
And how much, and the people that are good, because I mean, in my experience, and I mean, it's going to be, everyone's experience is going to be different, but in my experience, like my graduate supervisors are like that, they're not those people. They're not those scientists. There was definitely people I knew who had different experiences with different supervisors, and so it's it is a problem. It does exist, but they're not all like that.
For sure.
So is it a matter then of like changing the incentives, right? And then how do you measure like the goodness of a person and put that into their job performance rate? If you know what I mean?
What do you mean by the incentives?
Like, if we have a system where it's like we only have so much research dollars or whatever it is to go around, we have to allocate them somewhere. What do we want to incentivize? Who's going to get that money? Is it the person that has just all the best results, all the best, publishes so much, or do we want to try and broaden that and say, well, it's someone who's a great mentor. It's someone who's not a shitty person. It's, that's a metric that we have to bake into the system.
Yeah.
But it seems like, and maybe this is a cop-out again, that would be hard to do.
I think that a really simple way to do that is okay, so I guess like let's move back, and we're talking essentially about federal funding for research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it could be any industry, right? Like it's,
Right.
Whether it's a company, like the bottom line
Right.
is sales, or, whatever it is, right? But let's stick with the science. That's what we're doing. Yeah.
Because I think science is really unique in that, unlike corporations and unlike everything else, I give you the money before you produce anything. And everybody knows that when you write a research proposal, the thing you write is not always what you produce. It
changes.
It changes, and you write it knowing that it will change, but you write something that will get you money. And I think that system of here's money and then you produce means that you're
not accountable.
You're not accountable, and there's literally no other process except like government where I give you money and then I'm like, oh, you'll give me the thing that you said you were going to deliver later, right? And it's like, yeah, don't worry, I got it. You'll get it. And it's like, I'm not going to. There's nothing else. Like nothing else works that way.
Yeah. I guess even startup businesses and stuff, you're delivering the product that you said you're going to deliver. Like it's not this nebulous thing where it's like it can change. But in science, it has to be loose, right? Like you have to be able to go where the information takes you, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You can't go in with the pre-assumptions and then fit your data to that. So.
But I'm talking more specifically, like I've written grants where writing it, and like I would be, I would eat my hat if I was the only person that did this. I've written grants where I had data and I wrote a grant for a project that I knew I wasn't going to do, but I knew would give me the grant.
Right, right.
Because I just had the data. And it's like, that's what people do. And then they're like, oh, we tried this thing, it didn't work out. Yeah, because you weren't ever going to do it. And you had like another plan. This was to get money.
Right.
So I think like a really simple and easy way to weed out shitty people from getting millions of dollars would be assemble 12 regular, quote unquote, regular Canadians, like a jury system, basically. Since they're paying, it's their money, basically, that's funding the research. Like, it's tax dollar money, right? Get 12 people and get scientists to give them a pitch of so what and who cares.
Right. Right.
And like, if you cannot convince the person who is paying you to do your research that your research is worth it, if like if you're unable to communicate your life's work to somebody, you've got a problem, man.
Right.
Like, come on.
And then this opens up too the idea that there's like that being able to communicate that is a skill within itself.
Yes.
And that there should be more people focused on that, like more people that can bridge that gap, right? Because I don't think it's necessarily, I mean, yeah, maybe this is what we're trying to do, is we're trying to build, like, engineer it so that the people that can do both are the ones getting the money. But it could also be that there's a whole nother section of people that are working with the people who aren't as good at it to help them become good at it.
Yeah, learn it. Like, you've learned, if there's a new research technique that comes out that's completely new, like optogenetics, when that came out, people didn't know to light neurons to do stuff. They learned it. You can learn how to pitch.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And you can learn how to think about, what it is, get out of your own space, get out of that very tunneled vision of what your research is towards the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Hey man, I feel like we're like preaching to the choir here to each other, but but it's an interesting conversation, and I think it's one that, like I said, I wonder what the numbers are of, if you were to poll scientists, how many would agree? Because I tend to think that a lot of will. Just in my own like anecdotal evidence, my personal, like I was just with giving a workshop on podcasting science communication to a grad school from the University of Marburg here in Germany, and the feedback I got was positive, and from a lot of the leaders of the lab, we ended up having a discussion, not quite like this, but over dinner of what do we do, why are we, that nobody came away being like, why the hell should I care? Why am I doing this? I've only heard that one time in my discussions of science communication with scientists. I've heard that one time, maybe a couple times, where people are like, it's a lot of work and we're not getting paid for it. But then if you change the incentive structure, people would learn to do it. So I think that overall, like, a lot of scientists, especially younger ones, are probably really into it.
Yeah. I think it's kind of self-selecting, right? The people that'll be like, whoa, cool, podcasting, they're going to be into it.
Yeah, that's right. I've already attracted a biased sample to my group.
But that's like, so I used to work at York University in knowledge mobilization, and one of the things that basically, like, the idea of knowledge mobilization is, how do you get this knowledge to users who are not scientists?
Right.
And the simplest way, this is like a hard seg, but like the simplest way, I think, for scientists to basically to get more actually, no, I'll ask you. I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to make you guess, man. So what do you think is the simplest way for scientists? Simplest? Is that a word? It doesn't feel right.
Should be.
Yeah,
should
it
be.
Is, right? So for scientists to increase their citation counts and for them to put their research out there and at a targeted audience that is looking for that knowledge that is outside academia.
So when you say increase your citation counts, you mean, well, I mean, that's going to be scientists, but you want the knowledge to reach not just scientists, people that need the knowledge outside of academia.
Yeah, so there's like...
the best way to do that.
There is one action that, and this is scientifically validated too, which is pretty cool. So there's one thing that's the one thing that scientists can do to increase their citation counts as well as make that knowledge accessible for people who are looking for that knowledge that they produced. And and on top of that, control, this is like really wild, but control the global scientific vocabulary.
Shit, man. Is it like Twitter or something? That's the only thing I could think of that like would like reach targeted audiences and then like multiple audiences and stuff like this. I don't know, dude. What is it?
Wikipedia.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow.
So if they did this study, I think last year or 2 years ago, where they put this information about some molecule on Wikipedia, and they saw what happened about the articles that were cited in that Wikipedia article, and it received more citations. But not only that, but the content in that article was being used in university curriculums around the world.
Wow.
And so they use a specific word that, like, there were 2 words to refer to the same kind of notion.
Right.
And the specific word that they used was found more often than the other word.
Crazy.
Yeah.
But you know what? That makes perfect sense.
It
makes perfect
so obvious.
sense. Yeah, it's very obvious because, you know, again, just in my experience, it was like we were always told when I started learning science communication stuff, and when I was doing like hard science graduate work, basically the message was always start with Wikipedia, and go from there. You always heard like growing up, well, you can't cite Wikipedia, but it was like, but go there first, get a bunch of ideas, and then follow those threads.
Yeah, man.
Makes perfect sense.
And like I've worked on this a fair bit on my website, drsimonlandry.com.
Nice.
There is, I wrote like this step-by-step thing of how to include articles on Wikipedia. Like if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I don't know where to start, just go hit me up on Twitter at Dr. Simon Landry or go on my website. But it's like really it's super simple. And it's just these steps. But the coolest thing about Wikipedia also is that you can see the amount of traffic that certain pages receive. Okay. So you can actually measure like the impact.
Right.
And this is getting a little Cambridge Analytica-ish. But if so let's say we're working on, on a topic, and we're working on it in Canada. And we know that there's like a huge center for this topic in Germany.
Right.
We could create a Wikipedia article in German on that topic that cites us.
Right.
And so in that center, they would start with our articles.
Right.
So you're like you can control knowledge in like this way that's helpful, and everybody wins.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess you could always say that there might be a bad actor out there that would
there might
hinge on that. But so with the Wikipedia thing, this is just something that jumped into my head. Maybe because it's less, corruptible, let's say, because it's decentralized. Do you think that's one of the big bonuses of it? Or do you think that, like, how important is that Wikipedia is, refereed by everybody?
I think it makes it transparent and just like, I don't know. I think it's good.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I generally like I fall out on the same way.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that it's like, is it sustainable? Is it? I mean, it seems to be working pretty good so far.
They're doing all right.
Yeah. So maybe we should all like, when you get when you're when you're inevitably cruising Wikipedia and they ask you for some donations, maybe throw a couple more bucks their way,
Yeah,
or
just keep
volunteer to be a moderator. Like I haven't done it, but maybe I should.
Apparently that's intense. The Wikipedia moderator scene is pretty fiery, I hear.
Oh, I bet it attracts a bunch of people that, with some of
yeah.
the skills that we were talking about that are good and bad.
It's
Yeah.
either a scientist or a Wikipedia moderator.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like the frustrating thing about this is that makes total sense. Like adding stuff to Wikipedia, so
Yeah.
obvious and so effective. Also,
Right.
is that when I pitched this to researchers, to profs when I was working at York, the majority, well, I got two responses. One was Wikipedia, like that's not an authority, like it's sketchy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the other one, why would I do that? Who cares?
Yeah.
But literally everybody who is looking for information on anything in the world
Yeah.
will end up on Wikipedia.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. And
So-
it's in how many languages, right? Like it's not,
It
because that's
it
the
de-
other thing is so much of
Yeah.
science is done in English, right?
Exactly. You democratize knowledge for free. Like it's not behind paywalls.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like it's the sort of thing that U of T or like a MIT or somebody, some big school, is gonna clue in that their research centers need to have Wikipedia pages, and then everybody's gonna talk about it.
Right.
And they're going to be like, wow, this is so cool and innovative. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, man, just think about it for a minute and you would have
Yeah.
come to that conclusion.
It's true, but it's like you asked me the question and I missed it. Like I was,
Yeah.
So, but it's true. It's absolutely true. And I know like basically everybody I know, and maybe this speaks to the type of people that I hang out with, but like will get lost on Wikipedia. You start clicking on one thing, you start clicking on another. Like when Wikipedia came out, I remember spending, countless hours just like, and now the analogy too is like everyone talks about falling down the YouTube wormhole, right?
Yeah.
But Wikipedia was the same thing with the links, and it's like, oh, well, I'm reading about this, and now just click on that and go into this and go into that. So has anyone looked at YouTube in terms of it? I mean, Wikipedia is way easier because it's written.
Yeah.
You don't need video production or anything like that. But I imagine YouTube would at least start to have the same reach.
I think the advantage with Wikipedia is that you can have your articles just right there.
Oh, right. Yeah, like your
Yeah.
citations, your actual
Yeah. Yeah,
research
your actual-
papers.
Exactly.
Right.
Your actual research papers, it fits within a larger context.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And you're just at the top of Google, honestly.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And like YouTube, like, yeah, it's someone talking, video, like people still, this is something that I learned attending one of the Association of British Science Writers meetings.
Very cool.
They had done, I don't remember where the research came from, but there was research on it because everyone's always talking about like print is dead, right? And they were like, actually, people looking for knowledge, people looking for this stuff generally still consume print rather than video because you can skim, you can go to the parts you need, like you're very much able to, whereas a video, you got to wait for 10 minutes until the guy says it or he or she says it, and then you got to go back and be like, oh, well, I skipped too far ahead. Like it's just, it's not a searchable sort of medium, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, Wikipedia makes sense. So, I mean, I guess if like researchers are listening to this, that should be like the biggest take-home message of this podcast is you had to learn that your hand was your hand. Whoa, dude, and get on Wikipedia.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, I don't know, it's just one of those things that like there's a lot of talk about knowledge mobilization and all that stuff, but like
Science communication, whatever, all this stuff, yeah.
But man, Wikipedia, like, it's just the more you think about it, the more obvious. And also it increases your citation counts.
Among
like an
scientists. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
among
yeah.
scientists. It gives you the one unit of currency that scientists are looking for, citations. This is I don't think there are any other scientifically validated methods to increase your citation count.
Right.
And this is it. And it
Dude, that's
also is
wild.
beneficial to the world.
Like,
So,
yeah, to hit both audiences. I
yeah.
love the idea that there's like, because we were talking before about like how it's like it's become this separation, the ivory tower, and then the peasant public down below or whatever,
Yeah.
But it's like now it's like that's the meeting ground. That's the common space there where both of
Exactly.
these people, and maybe the scientists don't want to admit it and be like, yeah, but I go to Wikipedia
Yeah.
first too, right? Like,
Yeah.
where does it come? Yeah. Well, admit it, because it is. That's the meeting ground, and maybe that's, everyone's yeah taught. Yeah, no, that's it. It's so simple, but it blew my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right on. So, what are your current projects now? Because you finished the PhD, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then you moved on, so you were working at York, knowledge mobilization. So you've
Yeah.
kind of jumped into this science communication, knowledge mobilization world, much like
Yeah.
I did. So
Yeah.
what was your experience, and what are you up to now? Like, what made you make the switch, and
Yeah.
what sorts of projects? I know you got a ton of projects on the
Yeah.
go,
You
so I'll
may
let
you
you.
may have heard of one.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Oh, you definitely have heard of one if you're listening to
it's
this.
it's posters on T-shirts.
Yeah. I got a couple of things I want to talk to you about what's the limit of what you can put on one of these posters? Does it have to be a research paper
It can
or
be your face.
Okay, great. I might
It
have to
can.
do that.
Yeah. So I guess the story is I finished my PhD, and then I had done a lot of science communication and outreach and stuff, and I saw this. So I moved to Toronto because my partner, who's a psychologist, had an internship here, and I was looking for jobs, and I saw this thing, knowledge mobilization. Had no idea what it was, but it seemed like making videos and kind of getting. It seemed like it aligned with what
Enjoy doing.
I enjoyed and
Yeah.
and had been working on, and also was thinking about a lot because so there was this. I don't know what's your research background.
Parasitology, parasites.
Okay, and is that do you test humans at all? Or
No,
it's
I
all
was working in
parasites?
the veterinarian, more on the
Okay.
veterinarian side, so with animal parasites, but it
Okay.
was, we were working with how they, specifically mine, like this parasite that I studied, we believe it came from Europe, so we were looking at the DNA and
Okay.
how it got across, and then it's got this really freaky life cycle that takes control of ants and stuff, so a lot of
Ooh.
stuff there. This could be a whole nother thing we won't go down, but
I bet, yeah.
yeah.
So during my grad studies, one of the things that happened was I was working with cochlear implant users,
Right.
and maybe my first year of master's, I gave a presentation to a bunch of parents of cochlear implant kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a clinician, so I didn't relate with their experience.
Right.
And so I gave my talk, and I recognized that I was unable to empathize with their situation.
Okay. Yeah.
And what I was doing, I felt inadequate in some ways, and I felt like the knowledge that I felt I had was not what they were looking for.
Right.
And that made me feel super insecure, and it kind of made me pull away from from the knowledge mobilization aspect of my research. And from then I kind of really thought of it more in an abstract way, like what I was doing, which I think is what a lot of scientists do. When you're confronted with how does this apply to the real world, and you see, I don't know if you're studying cancer or whatever, you meet somebody who has cancer, and they're like, wow, I really appreciate that you're doing this work because it will help me personally. And you're like, well, I'm studying this like mitochondrial whatever
Pathway or some shit.
pathway
Yeah.
that might help you out in like 20 years, but like I'm not there. And then you kind of pull back and you just look at the cell as opposed to the person. And at the end of my PhD, I was really thinking back on like how far I was from the people that, like, the people that honestly cared about what I was doing.
Yeah, right.
And so I thought this job in knowledge mobilization was like, cool. This is a position where the purpose is to make research relevant to the public. But the reality is that it's not. Like, research funding is a bureaucracy. And at the end of the day, it's like, does it serve the research? And a lot of what I wanted to do didn't serve the research. And so unfortunately, that position didn't work out. And I, got laid off.
Yeah.
They actually shut the position that I was hired on. They terminated it.
Yeah.
Because I think they just didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
Like with knowledge mobilization in fundamental sciences.
Right. And they maybe weren't seeing the returns, some big pointer
Yeah.
of like, this is working.
Yeah, well, it's the sort of thing where it takes years, right? Like, if you're gonna commercialize something, so like knowledge mobilization for fundamental sciences is the equivalent, is like commercialization, but without the goal of making money. So whereas if you are like an engineering prof and you have some like innovation of some sort, you would make a business and it's very tangible, and eventually you sell your widget and whatever, you patent it and all that. But if what you study is the effect of concussions on teenage girls' hand coordination, let's say, and then you have this body of work that looks at concussions and all that in this population, the product of that, you're not going to be able to like sell a widget, but you could influence like policy.
Right.
That if you have a rugby team and there are concussions, you could do this test, or you should this and that.
Right.
And it's like, it's a long process, right? Because you're involved with like stakeholders and policymakers and like parent groups and sports groups and everybody. And it's like, it's hard and it's dirty, and it doesn't get to the widget that has an intellectual property patent and
costs
$1 million
X amount per widget. And
exactly. And honestly, it requires like a lot of creativity to be like, this fundamental research of visual perception in older adults and color contrast, who cares about this and how can we get it to them? And it's like, oh, maybe it's like, it's nursing homes that paint their walls. It's better if they paint it a certain color, as long as the floor is a certain color, then it helps you stay upright as a senior.
Yeah.
Like, there are all these things that like are really long-term applications of knowledge.
Right.
That don't exist in the way that scientists think of fundamental research, because they think like, no, we just care about how the aging brain perceives color differentials or whatever. And so anyway, all that to say that I was like trying to push stuff that, I don't know, they didn't see the value in it, I guess, or for whatever reason, they were like, nah, this isn't really working out for us. And then after that, I taught a couple classes, which was, have you taught classes?
Nah, very little. I TA'd a couple labs and stuff like that, but I always enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So much fun.
Yeah.
And then after that, I started doing knowledge brokering. So like knowledge, same idea, getting academic research to the public at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health here in Toronto. So, yeah, and it's like, it's interesting, man. It's the idea that we produce so much knowledge and that can benefit so many people, but like where that like knowledge production pipeline is so stacked towards the production, and it's like it's basically non-existent towards the dissemination and like selling this knowledge is wild if you think about it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we're paying for a bunch of stuff that is only being used by the people who make that thing. And it's not the person who buys that knowledge never is told why they're buying it or how it benefits them.
Right.
And I think it's completely unacceptable, and I guarantee you it will come and bite science's ass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, guaranteed.
Yeah,
You
guaranteed.
heard it here first.
Yeah,
And
no, and here's
do you mean in ways like, like with reduced funding, like people,
Yeah.
governments, it will become less and less of a priority?
Yeah, I think it's 100%. Like, I don't know if you follow Canadian science policy too closely.
No,
Yeah.
not super close.
So in 2000, I don't know, like 15 or 16, there was the Naylor report. So it was this report looking at fundamental sciences in Canada, like research funding and all that. And it said, here's kind of the state of Canadian fundamental research. Here's what we have to do. We need to increase funding. We need to do this and that. And when that came out before the 2015 Canadian elections, there was a big push by scientists led by grad students for like support the report. And it was like, hey, let's like share this report and the importance of the report with the public, so that they vote sort of with science in mind. And now Canada, we've got our elections in October,
Right.
and there's another movement I forget what it is, but like there's another scientist led movement. But like this is what fucking drives me nuts about scientists is that like and I've done this too, we only do outreach to the public when it serves us.
Right.
Like scientists are like, oh shit, right now we need to tell people that they should vote for somebody that gives us money. So let's do a big push and let's get people like funding our lives basically. But for like 3 years, you're stuck in the lab and you're like, no, I'm not going to publish my shit to Wikipedia. No, I'm not going to talk to that science journalist.
Yeah.
Oh, you're Instagramming science. You're not a real scientist.
Yeah.
Like,
It's got to be an everyday thing. It's got to be
Exactly.
an everyday part of the process, a part of what you do. Yeah.
exactly. And it's like, it's going to come back and bite us in the ass. So like universities, when I worked staff at York, I got a different view of how it works. Like I always thought university was a place of knowledge and research, and like that's kind of the main focus.
Yeah.
But man, universities are just businesses.
Right.
And you are, as a scientist, you are the product.
Right.
You are what they're selling. And so like what I realized, and this just completely changed my understanding of universities, but like for a university, it's a better use of resource investment for them to try to court one donor, a wealthy donor who will give them $1 million, than to get 10,000 students. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so like, if the idea is just to get money in because you've got a huge operation, then like you want the, what's it called? Whatever the donations wing of the university is, they don't control where research goes, but like they have a lot of power because at the end of the day, everybody wants to keep their jobs. Everybody wants that $1 million coming in. Everybody wants income to the university. And like when you've got funding I know that I'm starting to make no sense. I'm kind of like ranting. I've got my wires on the board.
Yeah, no worries, dude.
Being
No
like,
worries.
this connection, look at this.
Yeah.
I guess all I'm getting at is that universities are huge machines and huge corporations in which researchers work.
Mm-hmm.
And universities then sell the work of researchers as knowledge. And they don't give a shit they only give a shit about the knowledge being applied to the public if it's a metric that is measured and that is beneficial to them.
Right. So, and that being like donation dollars or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So like if you're a millionaire, which I understand you are.
Who told you?
Yeah.
The podcast business is lucrative. Yeah.
It is. So like if you're a millionaire and you're interested in, I don't know, research in like music or whatever.
Yeah.
And I tell you, oh yeah, we've got this great researcher, this great musician researcher, and they have impact. Look, they've been published in these newspapers, but also, or in these journals, articles, as well as they've influenced policy in whatever way.
Mm-hmm.
That's like impressive, and that's good for the university because it will like incentivize a donor to make that donation. But unless there's a value for like the university to look at those metrics, then nobody gives a shit.
Right.
And it's like this notion of impact. So like if you have research and you want research to have impact, no one can define what impact means.
Right.
We can try it right now. What does it mean for research to have impact?
Well,
in a measurable way.
To me though, that like it's undefinable because it's a shifting thing, right? Like it depends on the audience, right? Like for the guy with $1 million that loves music, or that's going to be one thing, but for the parents of kids with cochlear implants, it's going to be a whole nother thing. Right. So that's probably more what it is that why it's so undefinable. But I would say impact. Yeah, eyes on articles, like what reads, clicks on articles, citations. Yeah, what is it? I don't know. Donations, I guess, is the metric that universities are using, or money coming in is the metric, which doesn't serve a large part of the population, but.
Yeah, and that would be a different thing. Like I'm talking about if you're a PI
mm-hmm.
and you have a body of research, and there are two researchers in front of me, how can I compare the researcher's impact, the impact of their research?
Right. I'm thinking you would have to look at all the different mediums, I guess, that they've been published in. So scientific journals, newspaper articles, TV interviews, like Google citations. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and like, is that even impact? Like, is a journal? Not really. I mean, a lot of journals aren't cited.
Yeah.
Newspapers, like, how do I?
What's the value of being mentioned in a newspaper piece?
Yeah. But the interesting thing with this is that what we're talking about, if I tell you I've got, I'm selling Pepsi,
mm-hmm.
and I'm going to put out, like, what is the impact of Pepsi in North America? Pepsi could probably tell you all these metrics. Yeah. They almost certainly have departments that would be like, oh yeah, we've got like, it's been seen by this many people. It's got like this reach. And once you
and they have sales numbers behind that.
And they have sales, exactly. They'll be like, hey, this is exactly what we are getting. Like, this is what people are seeing, and this is exactly what we're getting back from it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And if you shift the idea of like knowledge as like this thing that academics create and kind of incestuously consume to knowledge as a product, like the way that Pepsi or literally anything else is a product, then you can apply these like marketing metrics to knowledge, stuff that like academia will never match the marketing budget of Apple,
Right.
like ever in a year.
Yeah.
They have these techniques and methods and metrics that like could measure so many things, and we just need to get outside of our little bubbles where like we think things are pure and driven by the quest for truth, and be like, yo, how does Beats know, how did Apple know to pay Dr. Dre $1 billion for Beats headphones?
Yeah.
Like, the knowledge is out there.
Right. And it just takes effort and a bit of thought into, well, how do we measure this? And what is the ultimate goal? Who is the audience and what is the goal?
Yeah.
Because I think like I said, like, the audiences are going to be varied. Like saying just like research in general, like what there's so many nuanced things, and not all of a university's research will apply to a certain audience, right? Like not everyone's going to give a shit about the same research.
Yeah.
And I think that you could probably, though, like, it's inspiring, like what you're saying, like it makes sense. And it's like, it, like some of the other things you said today, it's like, it's not that hard. Like it's a simple concept, it's a simple idea. It's going to take some effort to implement, but it's just a little slight shift in the way you're thinking about it. And it could have a big impact. And I think that there is probably grounds, like there's a seed already planted in the public, using the term the public as being just not academics, because people have already accepted that they fund research. Like it doesn't, the funding levels go up and down based on the governments and stuff, and people might not be aware of it. But generally, I think people just sort of are like, we need research, and the big things, that impact them, cancer, when a university comes up with a new insulin, they'll see those things and be like, but maybe they don't understand this whole idea of like, that it's all beneficial. It's all working for you. Even if it's not touching your life specifically, it's there. And so you probably have a seed to work with already in terms of marketing it or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, like, that's the thing. Science is like cool. People spend their lifetimes looking at stuff. It's like, if you can make a memorable commercial about bears wiping their butts with toilet paper.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Exactly. It's Charmin or whatever. Is this your other sponsor, Charmin toilet paper?
Shit, Pepsi and Charmin better get on board, because we're just giving them free ads here.
Like if you can advertise these really boring products, like why couldn't you advertise something that someone spends their life looking at, and there are cool pictures of, and it's like interesting,
and it's fundamentally like amazing. Like it really is. Like the idea that there's somebody out there that's pick anything, even if it's like this minute thing within the cell, but like when you think about it, and if the story gets told to you in the right way, you're going to be like, oh shit, like that's going on in my body right now. That's incredible. Right. That's amazing. Like think about microbiome stuff. That's pretty hot right now. And I mean, it's getting sold in like a shitty way, because a lot of people are, not thinking about the science and selling products based on it. And that's a whole nother discussion. But there's a lot of cool, I mean, I agree. And again, maybe we're preaching to the choir. Maybe we get somebody, from a totally different background that's never thought about it, and see if you can still reach them. But that's like market research. Do some market research. Do some focus groups. Put some investment in it.
And the thing is, the market research is science.
Yeah.
Like all of these things are just science. Just instead, and I think the difference is, instead of starting with the money, marketing ends with the money. And so like, because those are fundamentally incompatible models, people like don't think that you can do like marketing and sales with science, because that's just not the way science works.
Yeah. It's not, well, yeah, for all the reasons that we've just been talking about for like the past hour.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you get no arguments from me, that's for sure. That's for sure. As someone that works in this business, as you are too, but
in the biz,
yeah. But I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious to see how it changes, and if people get on board with it, because like I said, I do feel like from scientists that I engaged with during my time in grad school and stuff, I think they do see the value of it. But it was something that was always, because they weren't getting paid for it, because it was like an extra thing. It's like you said, they only did it when it benefited them, or when they were forced to do it. When the university was like, you have to have X amount of dollar, or X amount of time, or X amount of things, and some grant, like I know some grants, I've talked to researchers, some grants now, that's part of the application process, is you have to put in what you're going to do to like, but there's no real thought into what that is. They just say, do communication. Exactly. You have to do it. It's just a box you got to tick. And there's no real thought into it. There's not a lot of creativity into it. And from the university side, there's probably like less, maybe there's a small PR department or something like that, but they're probably operating in the dark, basically, with no knowledge of like what works, what doesn't work. Are we wasting our money here, or how do we measure the return on investment? Like all this kind of stuff. Yeah. So it also seems like it's like a, in that sense, it's the opportunity to change the game and be the first one on the next trend is there.
It's hard, man. That's like, it is there, but science is just such a machine that I don't know how you do it, honestly.
Yeah. Well, hey, I don't think we were ever claiming to give the answers here, folks. Yeah.
Yeah. But like it's a really interesting question of like, if kind of like, why is it that academia hasn't had a Me Too movement? Like there's just something really clunky and outdated about academia that like if you're tenured, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah, you're untouchable, basically.
You're untouchable, and that model, I think, is preventing progress.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we'd get tons of pushback from some tenured profs being like, well, I couldn't, without the freedom of knowing that, my job is secure, I wouldn't be able to follow all the strands that maybe aren't so productive but are necessary for the scientific process, right? But then it seems to me that there's like a balance, right? There's got to be a balance.
Exactly.
And if some of the ideas and thoughts, like if the marketing was better, like some of the ideas and thoughts that we were talking about, and if the marketing is better so that everybody just kind of understands that there's value here, it's not going to come in that product life cycle that you described with the widget. It's not how it works. That's not the model we're working on. Then there's more latitude for people to operate. But I don't know. Yeah. It's fascinating, dude. It's a great conversation. I mean, we've been going for like an hour and a half now, so we can begin to wrap it up. But I think you should let people know all the other activities that you're doing, because you got a bunch, right?
Yeah. So in terms of what pays the bills, ChemH. Shout out to ChemH, paying the bills. But in terms of like other projects, so you may have heard of Feather Poster.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's like fabric conference posters, which, as an aside, super hard to sell.
Yeah.
I don't know why people aren't like, and that's a skill that I wish I'd learned during grad school, how to sell stuff, because selling is hard, man. Yeah. So if you're listening to this, I hope you'll buy one.
Check it out.
Because
consider it.
Check it out.
Come on.
At least think about it.
It's probably a terrible sell job. I'm not very good at selling things either, man, so I apologize.
Think about it, maybe. So I got that. I'm playing. Do you have an Alexa?
I do. Yeah. My wife bought it. I'm wary of it. I'm always
yeah.
like, "Ugh, do I want this thing listening and knowing all my shit? I don't know."
You should be. You should be aware of it. So I'm developing Alexa skills.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's super simple, and it's actually a really interesting way to share knowledge. Like, so I have this skill called Poop Detective.
Poop detective. All right.
Yeah, yeah. So if you have an Alexa, just say, Alexa, open Poop Detective.
I really hope that somebody's listening to this on a speaker and their Alexa just opened it right now.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great. Yeah, so Poop Detective is basically like, you may have seen that image where it's like different colors of poop with different textures, and it's like, if your poop is this color, it means a certain thing.
The stool chart. Yeah.
Yeah. So I made that into an interactive thing, and it's super popular. Like, I have like 20,000 weekly users. It's really
You're about
popular.
to get another one, let me tell you, man.
Yeah. But so the interesting thing about that in terms of science and like what we're talking about is that Alexas are a really interesting way to collect population data.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, that's what Google's doing all the time.
Yeah. And so like I probably, and I don't track the data, but I could have more information about people's poop than probably anybody in the world because of this dumb skill that I made. And like, and the skill is itself a knowledge mobilization project because it's based on research. And it's like, that's kind of the type of creative outlets of research that I wish people were doing, being like, oh, cool. How can I use the latest tech and the thing that people are on to share my research? So I'm doing that. And I also have another Alexa related thing. It's like a database. It's like a marketplace intelligence thing for that, and just doing some podcasts in French, podcast workshops and stuff. So just keeping busy, man.
Right on. I mean, so like people, you say the website that you've got once, because everything you're doing is on the website, right? On your website.
Yeah.
So
drsimonlandry.com.
Right, man. And I mean, I'll link to it in all our stuff too.
Yeah,
so
cool.
it's all
Thanks.
good.
Appreciate it.
And yeah, check out featherposter.com. But I mean, this is
what's the coupon code?
2Brad, TWOBRAD, one word.
There you go. Save some money.
Yeah. Well, yeah, help us out. It's really desperate sounding pitches.
Just try it. Just think about it at least.
Anyway, man, great talking to you. I'm glad that we connected. I'm glad that you reached out. I'm really glad that we did this, and I think we should do this again for sure.
For sure.
Yeah. Because I enjoyed the conversation. I think other people will too. We can do, maybe we'll do some where we get more into like actual science and less about the business of it. But I think it's a valid conversation to have both. So
it's all science, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it, dude. So thanks a lot, and we'll talk to the listeners again next time.
All right, cool. Thanks, Brad.
And there you have it. Once again, thank you to Simon. I had such a blast talking to him. We could have gone on for hours and hours, and I assume and hope that we will do that again. The next step of these In Conversation episodes is to get a little three-way action going on and get British Brad in here too. And so we can expand the discussion. So we will work on getting that. Stay tuned. Follow us on Twitter at 2BradForYou or Instagram at 2BradForYou. Follow me on Twitter at bvanparadon. To stay up to date, subscribe wherever you're getting your podcast. Please subscribe. Throw us a rating. That always helps. And I have a number of really cool episodes coming up. Got another. Excuse me, I am feeling terrible. I have a cold right now. We have a number of great conversations coming up, scheduled, recorded. And I also recently visited a excellent conference on research into psychedelics for therapeutical reasons and other topics all around psychedelic research. I did a number of great interviews there, which I'm going to compile into a episode. So stay tuned for all of that. It's coming up. Thank you again for listening. Go to featherposter.com for your poster needs. Use the promo code 2Brad. Check out the Freak Motif. If you're around and have a chance, just Google them. Check out their stuff. Really great. SebastianAboud.com. If you're looking for a super fun artist, he's doing shows, I know, in Nanaimo in and around this time, October or September rather. And just check out his website, SebastianAboud.com. Get in touch if you need some logo work done or something like that. He is great as well. That's it. I'm rambling. I feel like crap. I'm going to take some NyQuil and pass out. So thank you once again to Simon, and thank you all for listening. We'll catch you next time. Bye.